My father brought his secret mistress to live in my inherited mansion, but when I found my late mother's hidden letters, I evicted them all, and now he's broke and begging for forgiveness. I'm 25 years old. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, and if you'd asked me a year ago how I saw my life, I would have told you it was pretty quiet. You know? Nothing crazy but stable. I lived in the house my mom left me when she died, a huge house that's been in her family for generations, like mansion-sized but not ostentatious, with 7 bedrooms and like 8 bathrooms or more. I don't know. I never counted them all. The thing is, this house is mine. Legally mine since I was 16 years old. And what happened a few months ago basically blew up my entire life and revealed secrets I would have preferred never to know. I guess I should start at the beginning. Or I mean, not the very beginning, because that would be talking about when I was born, but from when my mom died, and everything started changing without me realizing it. My mom died when I was 16. Pancreatic cancer that progressed super fast. Like in 6 months we went from, she has some weird symptoms to, there's nothing more we can do. It was horrible, obviously. But at that moment I was so in shock that I didn't really process what it meant to lose her. My dad, who was like 43 at the time, was devastated. Or so it seemed. He cried a lot, said he didn't know how to go on without her. All that stuff someone who just lost their wife of 20 years is supposed to say. I was an only child, so it was just him and me left in this giant house that suddenly felt empty and cold, even though it had all the rooms and space in the world. What I didn't know then, and this is important, is that my mom had gotten everything arranged legally very well. She had talked to her lawyer, Amy, and had put the house completely in my name before she died. I don't know if she knew something I didn't know, or if she just wanted to make sure I was protected, but basically the house was mine, period. My dad could live there. Sure, he was my father and I wasn't going to kick him out. But legally he had no rights to the property. The following years were weird but manageable. My dad worked as an engineer, made good money, and I finished high school, went to college to study design, and eventually started working from home. The house was more than enough for both of us. We each had our space, and we'd see each other at meals and stuff. My dad never mentioned dating anyone again, never brought anyone home, and I honestly thought he was fine alone, processing his grief in his own way. I adopted Moxie, my Cocker Spaniel, when I was 19, and she became my constant companion while I worked. The house had a huge yard with a pool, and Moxie loved running around out there. Everything was pretty normal, let's say, until about 5 months ago. My dad told me he was going on a business trip for 2 weeks, something routine he did from time to time. I didn't think twice about it, like, sure, Dad, have a good trip, let me know when you get there. He left on a Monday morning and I continued with my normal life, working from home, walking Moxie, seeing my boyfriend Christopher, who I met like 2 years ago, and who's basically the most stable and sensible person I know. Christopher comes from a middle-class family, very different from my situation, and he's always been super respectful about the fact that I live in this giant house I inherited. He's never tried to take advantage or anything weird. He's just a good guy who supports me in everything. So my dad comes back from his business trip, and that's where everything goes to hell. He arrives on a Friday afternoon, like 5 in the afternoon, and I was in my office working on a project with a tight deadline. I hear the front door open and I think, okay, Dad's back. I'll go down in a bit to say hi. But then I hear more voices. And it's not just him. I go downstairs and I find my dad, a woman I'd never seen in my life, and 2 girls who looked my age or a little younger. And there were also 3 dogs, like 3 huge noisy dogs that immediately started barking and running all over the living room. My dad sees me and smiles, like this was the most normal thing in the world, and says, "Ella, honey, meet Steph, my wife." His what? I just stood there unable to process what I'd just heard. Wife? When? How? Why? What? My dad keeps talking like nothing, says that Steph and he reconnected a few months ago. That it turned out she was his high school girlfriend, his first love, and they decided to get married during this trip. And oh, by the way, these are Lizzie and Lexi, her twin daughters who are 20 years old, and they're going to live here too. And the dogs, obviously, because Steph can't live without her babies. I was in total shock, like I couldn't even speak. My dad hugged me and told me this was wonderful, that we were going to be a happy family, that Steph was an amazing woman and he was sure we'd get along great. Steph smiled at me, but the smile didn't reach her eyes, you know? It was like forced, calculated. The twins looked uncomfortable, like looking at the floor and not knowing what to do. And I was just thinking, is this really happening or am I having a nightmare? That night, I didn't sleep at all. I could hear Steph's dogs running all over the house, barking, scratching doors. The next day, Saturday morning, I go down to the kitchen and Steph is already there, inspecting everything like she owned the place. She sees me and says, "Good morning, Ella. What a beautiful house. Your dad has very good taste." And I thought, my dad has good taste? This house was my mom's, her family's, and now it's mine. But I didn't say anything yet because I was trying to process everything. During breakfast, Steph started talking about changes she wanted to make, like she needed to remodel the kitchen because the cabinets were outdated, that the yard needed redesigning, that she wanted to convert one of the rooms into a yoga studio. My dad nodded at everything like a little lapdog, and I just sat there, thinking, hello, is anyone going to ask me what I think? Things went from bad to worse, super fast. Steph and the twins started acting like the house was theirs. Steph walked into my room without knocking, opened my closet and said she needed space for her clothes, that I had too many things and should donate them. I told her that was my room and I wasn't going to touch anything that was there. She looked at me like I was a bratty child and said, "Oh, Ella, don't be dramatic. It's just clothes. You can share." The twins, Lizzie and Lexi, started using my stuff without permission, like my laptop, my headphones, even my makeup. When I asked them to stop doing it, one of them, I think Lizzie, told me, "Relax. Don't be so selfish. We're family now." Steph's dogs weren't trained at all. They did their business anywhere, destroyed several pieces of furniture, and one day one of them attacked Moxie. My poor Moxie was terrified. She'd hide under my bed all the time and shake when she heard the other dogs. I had to take her to the vet because she had bites on her neck and paw. I told Steph that her dogs needed to be controlled, and she basically told me that Moxie was very dramatic and her dogs were just playing. But the worst thing, what really made me explode, was when I came home one day after being out with Christopher and found that all the portraits of my mom had been taken down from the walls. All the family photos, the portraits that had been there forever, had been replaced with photos of Steph and the twins. There was even a wedding photo of my dad and Steph in the living room where my parents' wedding portrait used to be. I started looking for my mom's photos and found them all stacked in a box in the basement, like they were trash. I went up furious and looked for Steph. Found her in the kitchen, making herself tea very calmly. I asked her what she'd done with my mom's photos, and she shrugged and said, "Oh, yeah. We needed to update the decor. You know, this is our house now, and it doesn't make sense to live in a shrine to someone who's no longer here." I told her that my mom wasn't someone who's no longer here. She was my mother, and this was her house, her family's house. Steph looked at me with a condescending smile and said, "Your mom was a bad mother if she let her daughter grow up so spoiled and selfish. And honestly, she did a bad job raising you. If now you're so useless, you can't even share your space." That's when something broke inside me. I yelled at her to shut up, that she had no right to talk about my mom like that she didn't know anything about anything. My dad appeared because of the commotion, and when I told him what Steph had said, I expected him to confront her, to defend my mom at least, but he didn't. He just said we all needed to calm down, that Steph didn't mean it badly, that I was being too sensitive. That's when I realized my dad had completely changed, or maybe I never really knew him. I told Steph, the twins and my dad that they had to leave, that this was my house, not theirs, and I didn't want them there anymore. Steph laughed in my face and said, "Your house? Honey, your dad owns this house. You just live here because he allows you to." My dad didn't say anything to contradict her, just stood there like a coward. That night, I called Christopher crying and told him everything. He told me I needed to talk to a lawyer immediately to clarify the legal situation. The next day, Monday morning, I called Amy, the lawyer who had handled my mom's will. I explained the whole situation, and she told me to come to her office that same day. When I got there, Amy pulled out all the documents and showed me what I already knew but needed to see on official paper. The house was completely in my name. My dad had no legal rights to it, and I could ask them to leave whenever I wanted. Amy helped me draft a formal 30-day eviction notice. I gave my dad a copy that same afternoon and told him this was serious. That either he chose to move with his new family or he could stay with me if he divorced Steph, But I wasn't going to allow that woman and her daughters to stay in my house for even one day longer than legally necessary. My dad was in shock. I think he genuinely thought the house was his, or that at least he had some right to it. He tried to reason with me, told me I was being cruel, that I couldn't throw him out on the street, that Steph and the twins had nowhere to go. I told him that wasn't my problem, that they decided to get married and move in without consulting me, and now they had to deal with the consequences. Steph appeared and started yelling at me, telling me I was a spoiled brat, that I had no heart, that my mom would be ashamed of me. I told her never to mention my mom again, or I'd call the police immediately. My dad had to take her to their room because she was completely losing control. The next few days were horrible. The tension in the house was unbearable. Steph and the twins looked at me with pure hatred. My dad avoided talking to me directly. I decided to take additional measures because I didn't trust them at all anymore. I hired a locksmith to change all the locks in the house and only gave the new key to Christopher as backup. I installed a security system with cameras at all entrances and exits. I put all my mom's important documents, family jewelry, and other valuables in a safety deposit box at the bank. I wasn't taking any chances that Steph would try to steal something or destroy something out of revenge. And it turns out my paranoia was justified because one afternoon, like 2 weeks after giving them the eviction notice, I was looking for some old boxes in the attic to pack some of my mom's things I wanted to store better, and I found a box I didn't recognize. It was an old shoebox, kind of hidden behind some old suitcases. I opened it thinking it would be old photos or something like that, and what I found was a bunch of letters. Love. Letters, to be specific. Letters from my dad to Steph, and from Steph to my dad, dated from like 28 years ago. I started reading them and felt like the floor was opening up under me. These letters weren't from before my parents met, no. These letters were from when my parents were already married. My dad and Steph had been having an affair for years, from before I was born until a year before my mom died. The letters talked about how much they loved each other, how hard it was to be apart, about future plans together. One letter from Steph said something like, "I hate that you have to go back to her. I hate pretending we don't exist. Someday we'll be able to be together openly." And a letter from my dad said, "I just need to wait for the right moment. I can't leave her now, but eventually I'll find a way for us to be together." I sat there on the attic floor crying and reading these letters for hours. Everything made sense now. Why my mom sometimes seemed sad for no apparent reason. Why my parents sometimes argued in low voices and would stop when I entered the room. Why my mom had been so meticulous with her will and had made sure the house was completely in my name. She knew. She knew the whole time and never told me anything because she didn't want me to grow up hating my dad or feeling responsible for their problems. But now my dad had gotten back together with his mistress, the woman he cheated on my mom with for years, and had brought her to live in my mother's house like nothing. Like it wasn't a horrible betrayal of her memory, of me, of everything. I went down from the attic with the box of letters and went straight to find my dad. I found him in his office working on his laptop. I threw the box on his desk and told him, "Explain this to me." My dad went pale when he saw the letters. He didn't try to deny it or anything, just sat there in silence for several minutes. Finally, he said, "We never wanted to hurt anyone. Your mom and I hadn't loved each other for years. It was a marriage of convenience in the end." I yelled at him that it was a lie, that my mom loved him until the day she died, that she knew about the affair and still stayed with him probably because of me. I asked him if he had ever really loved my mom or if everything had been a lie from the beginning. My dad started crying and said, yes, he had loved my mom at first, but Steph had always been his true love, that they had separated in high school due to family circumstances, and when they reconnected years later, they couldn't help but be together again. I told him he was a coward and a liar, that he had destroyed my mom and now he was destroying what little was left of her by bringing his mistress to live in her house. I went to look for Steph too. I found her in the living room watching TV very calmly. I showed her the letters and told her I knew everything about the affair. She didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. She shrugged and said, "Yes, your dad and I love each other. We've always loved each other. Your mom was an obstacle that's finally gone now." I asked her how she could be so heartless, how she could live with herself knowing she had helped destroy a marriage and a family. Steph looked at me coldly and said, "Your dad wasn't happy with your mom. I gave him something she could never give him, and now we can finally be together like we always should have been." Then she added something that left me frozen. The reason they were there wasn't just for love. It was because Steph was bankrupt. She'd lost all her money in bad investments and gambling debts. And moving in with my dad to my house was literally her lifeline. She said it just like that, casually. Like it was obvious and acceptable to use my dad and our house to save herself from her own financial irresponsibility. The last few days before the eviction deadline was up were chaos. Steph and my dad were packing their things, but Steph kept trying to take things that weren't hers. I caught her trying to put my mom's antique silver flatware in one of her suitcases. When I told her to return it, she screamed that she deserved compensation for all the trouble I'd caused her. I called the police, and an officer came to supervise the rest of the moving process to make sure they didn't take anything that didn't belong to them. The twins, Lizzie and Lexi, apologized to me before they left. They said they didn't know anything about their mom's affair, that they'd been just as confused as me with all this, and that they were really sorry for invading my space. I told them I understood, that it wasn't their fault what their mom did. Finally, they left. All of them, my dad included. The house was silent for the first time in months. I cleaned everything, returned my mom's photos to their place on the walls, repaired the damage Steph's dogs had caused. I thought it was all over, that I could finally move on with my life. But like a month later, I received a legal notice. Steph and my dad were suing me. They claimed they had rights to part of the property because my dad had lived there for years and had contributed to the maintenance of the house, and because supposedly I had caused them severe emotional distress by kicking them out. It was absurd. Completely absurd. But I still had to hire Amy again to defend me in court. The case went to trial, and it was horrible having to sit there while Steph blatantly lied, saying I had threatened her, that I had been abusive to her and the twins, that my dad had paid for all the renovations to the house for years. My dad backed up all her lies, looking at me with a coldness I didn't know he had. We presented all the evidence. My mom's will documents, the security camera recordings showing Steph trying to steal things, testimony from neighbors who confirmed I'd always been the owner of the house. The judge heard everything and in the end dismissed the case completely. He said there was no legal basis for their lawsuit, that the house was indisputably mine, and that the accusations of emotional abuse had no support whatsoever. Basically, he told them to stop wasting the court's time with frivolous lawsuits. I thought that was the definitive end. Like 2 months passed without hearing anything from my dad. I continued with my life, working, spending time with Christopher, trying to process everything that had happened. I was in therapy, trying to deal with my dad's betrayal, and with the pain of knowing my mom had lived with that horrible secret for years. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I hear the doorbell. I open the door and there's my dad, with several suitcases by his side, looking absolutely destroyed. His eyes were red like he'd been crying for days, his clothes wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He says, "Can I come in?" I didn't let him in immediately, just stood there, looking at him waiting for an explanation. My dad started crying right there at the door and told me that Steph had immediately cheated on him, that he'd found messages from her with another man, that when he confronted her she told him she'd never really loved him, that she'd only used him to have a place to live while she sorted out her financial problems, and now that she had a better option she was leaving him. Steph basically kicked him out of the apartment they'd rented together after the eviction, and my dad had nowhere else to go. I'm not going to lie. Part of me felt satisfaction seeing him so broken, like instant karma for everything he'd done. But another part, the part that still remembered when he was my dad before all this, felt pity. I told him he could stay temporarily. Very temporarily. But with very clear conditions. We had to go to family therapy together. He had to fully admit what he'd done and the damage he'd caused. And he had to respect that this was my house and my rules. My dad accepted everything without arguing. We've been going to therapy for like 3 months now, and honestly, it's been brutal but necessary. My dad is finally being honest about the affair, about how he cheated on my mom, about how he failed as a father by prioritizing his forbidden romance over his family. He's asked me for forgiveness 1,000 times, and I know he's genuinely sorry, or at least that's how it seems. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive him completely. There are days when I look at him and I only see the man who betrayed my mom, who lied to me my whole life, who chose his mistress over me. But there are also days when I see my dad, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework and hugged me when I had nightmares. We're taking things day by day, trying to rebuild something that will probably never be what it was before, but at least it's honest now. Christopher has been incredible through all this, supporting me without judging, giving me space when I need it, and being there when I need him too. Moxie is much happier now that the house is peaceful again. She runs around the yard without fear and sleeps in my bed every night. The house no longer feels empty and cold like before. It feels like mine, completely mine. A place where I can decide who enters and who stays. And I guess that's enough for now.